Okay, so let's get started. So hello everyone, welcome back to the afternoon session. So in this afternoon we will have a few panels. So our first panel is about wildfire session. The reason that session is very important. Hello everyone, please have a seat. We will have the afternoon session. So. Yeah, we'll get started. So last year in AGI Day, we, in discussion with all our industry advisory board members, we identified that wildfire is a really big challenge in this area. So that's why in this year we organized a special session to share some work from utilities, from national labs, and also from manufacturers to talk about their strategies on wildfire mitigation. So our first speaker is Larry Bechtel. So let me briefly introduce you first. So Larry Bechtel is a Senior Vice President at PGE. He is responsible for advancing PGE's strategy to build the grid of the future, one that is resilient, smart, and delivers a clean energy future. He oversees PGE's strategic system architecture and system upgrades, which will serve as a foundation for the smart grid of the future. This includes initiatives related to system integration and operation, smart cities, enabling distributed energy resources, energy storage, dispatchable standby generation, transmission system performance and development, marketing interfaces, as well as innovation. So Larry is also a long-term supporter for AGI. He served as our IAB members for many years. Thank you for your support. So now let's welcome Larry.
There we go. Better. That seems like. Yes, so it's wildfire time. So let's see if we can move in here. I think many of you know where Portland General Electric is. 950,000 customers, about 2 million people. There's a statistic last night that I heard, as we were presenting it in the community. It's experiencing a lot of growth, but Portland has doubled in size in the last 30 years. So that was kind of a stunner for me. I was like, wow, since 1994, we've doubled in size. And we all have that experience. You've got certain communities, some that have, it's like doubled, some that have tripled, some that are, we had one community last night that was 6 times what it was, 30 years ago. And it's kind of surprising to see, and it's great that we are all thinking about the electric grid. But one of the things that was coming out of the communities is this wildfire issue. And so in Oregon, 60% of the land is public. Now that could be BLM, that can be Forest Service, but as you think about the state, just having that much being public land, how it's managed makes a big difference in all around communities. And we're seeing real impacts from fires. So as of Monday, United States, we had 3.8 million acres burnt this year. Now, good news is that's less than last year. We were a little over 4 million acres at this point in time. But that still doesn't make you feel good when you think about how many fires. And so that's obviously the number here is 3.6, but as of Monday that was increased. I put this together last week. So that's how much it changes. And I think we're all paying a lot of attention to those impacts and what's happening. When we think about utilities and what's happening with fires, the damage that is caused, the disruption, all of a sudden you've got a 500 kV line that gets tripped out. And that happened a few years ago. And we had to work with RC West to give us a heads up when something like that was going to come, because we have special protection schemes, RAS schemes, that trip off generation. And all of a sudden you lose, 1,000 megawatts, and you're wondering, what am I going to do this next 30 minutes? It's nice to see that. And so obviously all the satellite imagery, We were able to do that, and so we all as utilities now get notices when a fire is within 10 miles. We all have systems that tell us that too, but if there's one that's involving special protection schemes, we're getting a call from the RC telling us, hey, heads up, there's an issue out here. And that worked great for a year until the Priest River fire up in Canada hit the 500 line and took out 1,600 megawatts, and we all of a sudden were in trouble in the Northwest again. And so we had to, let's make sure that BC is included in that so that when we see the impacts of wildfires there. So I use those examples to say we as an industry have to keep evolving, and it happens at the west-wide level as well as we'll get into a little bit here on the distribution all the way down to neighborhoods. Financial cost, we'll talk a little bit about that, but any one of these fires can bankrupt a utility. And, we have no protection. The cases will go on for years, but it could change the outcome of a utility really, really fast. Obviously, reputational pressure. I don't know if has anybody gotten involved with transmission lines or distribution lines? You go out to the community and you're talking to them. Well, I had that opportunity last night, and every community member asks about wildfire. If this line's going here, what's going to happen? Am I going to be at risk? What are you going to do to protect me? If I live in this area, is that a problem? So just know that every one of our customers is thinking about wildfires and what it might happen. And so safety is front of mind. And so here are some examples. I think we all have seen the Hawaii fire. $6 billion in damage, 2,200 structures. Camp Fire, if you remember, 2018, 85 people died in that fire. And if you recall, that was a transmission line with an insulator and a clamp that failed, and in a high wind scenario. And that community was trapped. There was only one way in and out. I would say for our utility, the turning point for us on wildfire started with us sending some crews down there to help rebuild and reconstruct some of that situation. And those crews came back with a different attitude about what wildfire can do. And it wasn't until Memorial Day of 2020 when we actually had to put a public safety power shutoff in place on Mount Hood. And that was the hardest thing for me. I know all of us in the utility business, you got to keep the lights on. That's what you do. You got to keep the lights on. Because what if they can't pump water? If they can't see their way out of and can't get their garage door open? You think about all those things. But that fire did a lot of damage across Oregon that Memorial Day weekend and for the next couple of weeks. And I'll just say that thank goodness we did shut off the power there on Mount Hood. We had so many customers calling us and telling us after the fact they had trees and lines down everywhere, but branches all over their homes, etc. And they said, our house would have been burned down, if we would have had a fire up there. So, know it makes a difference. This latest one in LA, I don't have the statistics on it, but I think it was also staggering to see all the homes on the beaches. These were not, rural treed areas. And so we have to think again, how does that urban impact take place? For us, as I look at Portland, Forest Park, 5,000 acres, in and amongst a whole bunch of homes on the West Hills that are beautiful homes that have been there a long time, all at risk. And that'd be the last thing any one of us would want to have happen. So we think about response, we think about planning, execution. We're now all going into mitigation plans. We're required under regulatory to have a plan each year, put that in place and act on it, and make sure that you complete everything that you've got in that plan. And then as you're doing it, what are you learning to get ready for the next plan for the next year. It's a lot of work. Nobody was doing that, prior to 2018, certainly in the Northwest, no one was doing that. And I would say it is now a common practice. And I'll also say that insurance companies are looking for it. And again, customers are looking for it. These are really highly sought after, and you got to make sure you execute on them. And in those mitigation plans, there's clearly ideas for how are we hardening the system, how are we making sure we're managing vegetation, and then also situational awareness of what's going on out there, probably the three key areas. If I talk about vegetation management, how many of you are aware of the original standards for vegetation clearances, especially in the distribution side, the National Electric Safety Code? They were developed to keep children who are climbing in the trees safe. So you could reach out 3 feet and touch the line. That's how it started. And so you say, oh, how does that apply to wildfire? Wait a minute. The tree's taller than the line. It's going to reach over when it falls. We're seeing currently the death rate on trees anywhere from 3 to 5%. And on 2.5 million trees that we manage on our easements and right-of-way, that's a lot of trees. And it's been accelerating. So that means you're out there, you're using techniques like hyperspatial photos and your LiDAR, et cetera, to determine which trees, where they at, how you're thinking about it, and then making sure that you're removing those things. And that all becomes part of your mitigation plan, but it's a lot of effort. So when we harden, whether it's metal poles, when you're reconductoring, just drive around. If you're in the rural areas, I should have brought some of those pictures, but we all have them as utilities. You got number 6 copper out there. Just count the number of sleeves in the wire as you drive by. Every one of those sleeves was a tree that got into the line, more than likely. And it's kind of scary when you drive around, you see all those, and each one of those could be an ignition for a wildfire. So we are hardening with better wire. Are you putting covered wire out there? How are you thinking about the facilities and as you harden? Probably one of the best things that happened to us came out of Incubate Energy with EPRI, this company called Pano AI with their cameras. We grabbed them, this was about 4 or 5 years ago, and we said, you look like something that could help us because we don't have to sit and watch the camera. The camera senses the smoke and then alarms us. Been the best thing. I don't know how many of you have seen them and are using them, utilities, but highly recommend them. And we're now using that same AI technology to think about security in substations, et cetera. But they are amazing, the distance they can cover, and they're getting crews to fires, what would have been probably a 2-hour wait before the fire got big enough. We're getting them there 2 hours ahead. So it really makes a difference when you think about wildfire. Other things that I would be thinking, and as we get into it's protection. So what are you using for fusing? What are you using for reclosing? One of the issues out of the LA fire was a recloser that they thought had gone into its auto. They actually had sent out a signal to trigger it to go into would be non-reclosing status. So it'll just instantaneously come off if there is an issue. It did not. So, again, how do we confirm that that device is going to be set up and doing what we want it to do? So we talk about, putting them in that enhanced safety mode in terms of instantaneous. It's really important out there. You're going to have outages. You're going to have to talk to customers a lot more because you're going to have to patrol that, figure out what happened before you re-energize, make sure it's safe. But we're doing that. We have 13 different zones, in our high fire risk zones that we've identified. But it's also starting to happen in other areas, so we keep expanding those. We started out with 8, we're up to 12, going to 13 right now. But protection control is really, really important, and I'm sure our friends over here from Schweitzer will talk a little bit about that. You know, doing a lot of things, you know, breakaway secondary services. In our high fire risk zones now, we require all services to go underground. And it's because we're putting the primary underground as well. And there's nothing worse than you put the primary in, and then you got to go back, and the customers don't want to pay for it, and a lot of that. I'll just say it's easier to have it done right the first time. So we are requiring that now on all of the new homes. Other things that we mentioned, early fault detection. So there are devices that are sensing and looking for signatures that would tell you got a cracked insulator on the line, or you've got a gunshot, you've got a conductor that's split, you've got devices, those signatures you're looking for out there. We're starting to learn from it, hope to get better. It's a little bit where even AI can come into play on those as well. Something that a lot of utilities are going to is drones. We haven't gone to them as much yet. Really looking forward to doing that, because getting patrols, the aerial view quickly is worth a lot. And you can see an awful lot that you can't see from the ground. So getting that sort of imagery is really important. We've seen a lot of people doing that. You're also getting auto drones, pop-up drones I want to call it, that come out of a substation, do its patrol, come back, put itself back down again. And those types of attributes, ways to manage the system should help us as well. Other things that I would mention, you know, the broken conductor, can you signal that? Can you see that quickly? High impedance faults. So whether it's bare conductor or insulated conductor that's fallen on the ground, you got a high impedance fault there, can you detect it? How do you see that? That's been a long-standing issue for utilities. Another one is the, I'll call it the high-speed sensing. So what are you seeing from meters? Imagine, if you will, that you do have a fault on a line, you know, triangulate, you know, whether it's through meters to say, here's where the location of the fault is, or you're using your relays from the substation to tell you how far it is. And oh, by the way, take a quick snapshot now from satellite to tell you what's happening there. Those are the kinds of things that we have to be advancing ourselves and thinking as we operate into the future. LiDAR, I mentioned, hyperspectral. These types of images are really important. And you know, satellite views, I know PNNL has access to a lot of really advanced satellite views, so however we can use that, it would be to our advantage as well. Last things, we try to gear up all of our employees, trucks. If you're working you're in the fire season, you need to jump on that really quickly, but you got to give gear to those folks. They've got to be sensitive to and know what they should be looking for. We talked a little bit about relays and getting to the enhanced power line safety settings. The last one I'll call out is the public power safety shutoff. And it was thought for a long time that that's kind of our last resort. I don't want to turn the customers off, but if I have to, I will. We're now looking at it in a scientific way to say, what's the fuel? What's the temperature? What's the humidity? What's the wind speed? And you're going to have to make a call based on that. And if it says you're exceeding your risk criteria, you shut it off. And you're having to shut off more than before in the past. And it's not something you want to do, and you really have to work with customers a lot in terms of education and awareness. So share those thoughts, but that is kind of from an affordability standpoint, if you have no other options, you've got to take that option. And like I say, it's not a pleasant one with customers, but I hearken back to, if I can save a house, if I can save somebody's life, it's well worth it. So thank you. We'll pass it on to our next speaker, and we'll save questions for the end, I think.
Okay, so we have the Q&A at the end of this session. So our next presentation will be a joint presentation from PNL and BPA. So let me introduce our speakers. The first speaker for this presentation is our colleague Andrew Coleman from PNL. He served as a chief scientist at PNL in the Earth System Predictability and Resiliency Group. Andrew brings 30 years of research in the fields of geoinformatics, hazard informatics, emergency management, and data science. His research focuses on bringing science-driven solutions to a variety of end users to inform strategic and critical decision-making, particularly in the realm of risk assessment and resiliency in critical energy infrastructure. And our second speaker will present virtually. She is Kelly Miller. Kelly Miller leads program management activities for wildfire mitigation at BPA to ensure safe and reliable transmission of power in the Pacific Northwest. She has held over roles in engineering and project management over her 13 years at BPA after spending 5 years in the private sector. So, welcome.
Wei, thank you. I think that's on. Wei, thank you very much for the introduction. Larry, thank you very much for your presentation. I think there's going to be a lot of common themes. I think between what you presented and also PG&E, it's just been a great beacon of the right things to do in regards to wildfire. So yeah, I'm really excited to be able to present this together with Kelly at EPA. Kelly and I have been working together for a while, and with BPA as a whole in their wildfire mitigation program. Just as an aside too, kind of in this topic area, there's a wildfire executive order that's out. So it's PNL, I'm leading a response for PNL in that for DOE. So as part of that effort, Kelly is also leading from her perspective, from kind of representing BPA, WAPA, and SWAPA. And this is all about driving towards best practices. Larry covered a lot of this already, and so we've seen a lot of changes happening over the past decade. Where once upon a time, at least in the United States, this was really a regional operational hazard, and it's certainly grown to be more of a national and international crisis. And what's really interesting when you talk about utility-caused fires, it's only 3% of all fires that are started. There's all these other reasons, from lightning strikes to other kind of human-caused fires. The utilities only cause 3% of those. But every year, on average, you kind of have that range of about 50 to 500,000 acres that are burned because of those utility-caused fires. And overall, for the U.S., we're seeing $394 to almost $900 billion a year in related costs to fire. And kind of a correction on what's written in the slide there, but about $200 billion of that is related to specifically to utility damages. And we see it manifest in a lot of ways, from down conductor wires to the faulty hook on the campfire, And this is probably less than a $10 part that failed and caused that fire to come down. Smokehouse Creek in Texas, we saw some interesting situations there. So not only structure loss, but livestock loss, and also a really high threat to a nuclear facility there. So every place has its own kind of unique challenges and unique kind of consequences around wildfire hazards. So I'm going to step back from sort of the BPA perspective for just a minute and look at the country as a whole. And if we look at these kind of 9 regions across the country, we see some interesting patterns, we'll say. Where really every region in the country is seeing an increase in fire occurrence. So this used to be very much a Western kind of issue. And even if you look at the Northwest right in the center, from year to year we have a lot of variability, a lot of interannual in fire occurrence. For the Northwest, starting in 2014, that was 2013, 2014, that was a big inflection point for us where we saw much more occurrence of fire. For other areas in the country, like the Northeast, the Southeast, the Upper Midwest, in the last 5 years, we've seen a huge uptick in fire occurrence. So anywhere from kind of doubling to 12-fold kind of increases in occurrence. So this has become a national problem. So focusing on the BPA service territory for a minute, just to unpack this graphic a little bit. So one of the things that PNNL does for BPA is every year we generate a new risk burn probability data set for them. So we're taking all the latest information, everything we know in terms of the fuels in the landscape, what's happening with the weather, what we see in the year with regards to ignitions, what were the conditions in those ignitions, what was the fire behavior there, right? So all that information comes together to generate a current burn probability mass. So typically we're doing this very early in the year, kind of in from November to January in the fire kind of peak fire season. And so then we go back after the fires have occurred that year and say, well, you know, how did the model do? How did what was our predictive capability? By and large, we're seeing where fire occurs are places where we generally expect fire to occur. So that's a good thing. However, we're also seeing this emerging pattern too, where we're seeing a lot of fires starting to occur in places where historically it's been very low probabilities. So namely west slope of the Cascades. So that's becoming more and more of an issue. And right, so we call this an emerging risk. PG&E is already working at it. BPA is already working at it. Others are at it. But what's really particularly concerning about the west slope of the Cascades is the biomass availability. Right, there's a ton of fuels there. So if you get a fire going, it's undoubtedly really catastrophic. The other thing to point out is that graph in the upper right, and that's showing kind of trends of fire occurrence again for the BPA service area. Over the long term, for smaller fires, we tend to see about 165 more fires a year that are less than 100 acres. For larger fires that are over 100 acres, we're seeing in general almost 9 more large fires a year. So that's kind of where the trend is. So now when we talk about mitigating wildfire risk, so it's about mitigating the risk, it's about the resiliency, it's about the reliability, how do we build the system back better in the end. So we like to think about that in these three kind of categories, which truly follow more toward an emergency management cycle. So one is in the pre-event phase, so that's where we're doing a lot of that risk mitigation work. There's specific things that have to be done in that space, like vegetation management, infrastructure hardening, some of these things. But then there's all these activities that are happening when you actually have an event going on, or you're at the cusp of an event happening. So kind of the during event or peri-event conditions. And then finally in the post-event. So we're maybe you've actually had an event or again a really close call. What are the things that you need to be thinking about and doing to improve your system out into the future? So those are kind of the three big bins. So to add to each of those more complexities into it, you really have to be thinking about, well, what's happening out in the physical environment. Again, the vegetation management, your asset inventories, your asset health. What are the things out in the field that right, you can have control over? And then there's the systems focus, right? What are you doing in terms of how you operate the system? What are those thresholds you need to be paying attention to that might pose a change in the way that you're operating the system? There's also the human factors piece, and Larry brought this up as well, like that training, community coordination, collaboration with other land stewards and landowners, and just make a point that, right, for a utility, you can do as much as you can do within your right-of-way corridor to manage that. But your adjacent landowner, you don't necessarily have, well, you don't have the right to do things there. So it's really about building out those kind of relationships with those adjacent landowners and stewards, because you've really got to manage this in a way that it's more at the landscape scale. right? So if you do have an ignition that starts either within your utility right away or nearby, you can reduce the overall severity and impact of that fire. And finally, it's the learning and adaptation. So what are you doing when you've had an event or a close call event? How do you improve your response to it? How do you maybe improve restoration activities, right? And so that's just got to be that sort of continuous process. So I want to stress the wildfire risk mitigation. We like to think about that as being a journey, right? This isn't something you get done in a year or 2 or 5, right? But it's really about understanding and assessing where the hazard exists, what's the vulnerability and exposure to your assets, building out wildfire mitigation plans. In Washington and Oregon, we're required to do that, but other states they're coming, but not necessarily a regulatory requirement. And then it's kind of building up the resourcing to implement some of those actions, right? And that's the part that takes time, right? You have staff and budgetary resourcing you have to be concerned about. And all this to say, like you're doing all this in a changing environment, so it's it feels like maybe you're always in that mode of trying to catch up. So, and these are just a few, right, of all the elements that you have to think about in terms of wildfire risk mitigation. It's super complex. And I'll say that every utility, it's going to look different in terms of what that configuration is and what you can implement, when you can implement it, where you implement it. And at the end of the day, right, I mean, you're kind of trying to drive, understand what's your risk tolerance, right? And so you have this resilience and reliability kind of trade-off. So what are you willing to accept in terms of risk versus your investment to make a more resilient, reliable system? So with that, Kelly, hopefully I see you there. So I'll hand it over to you, and I'll drive the slides.
Great, thanks, Andre. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you so much. And as Andre said, we're going to talk about a lot of the same things that Larry brought up as well. But, wildfire is just one risk. And I know that everyone in the room is aware of that. But during the summer, you kind of tend to forget about it. So wildfire risk, from our perspective, really goes into our overall resiliency framework at BPA, where it's each part of these pillars under organizational, operational, and financial, but really keeping in mind that safety of both our staff and the community is a core value for us. So if we then focus in on wildfire resiliency, next slide, Andre. Again, very similar to what PGE has talked about, but this is our wildfire mitigation hierarchy, and it's similar to other utilities where the base of everything is making sure our system is up and functioning as best as it can. So that is looking at regular system hardening, so upgrades as planned, regular maintenance to both assets and vegetation. On top of that is our situational awareness, and that's where a big piece of that is working with our partners at PNNL to provide our wildfire risk models. We also have meteorologists on staff that work closely with us, not only through wildfire quote unquote season, which there's no dates on that, but also throughout the year to alert us of any weather that could be coming in or forecasted that could harm our system. And then above that, again, as Larry said, we've kind of thought as public safety power shutoffs as a last resort. And it is in our mind, that's the last piece that we do is we turn off the power, but it's a tool in our tool belt. Just like undergrounding, not for BPA, but undergrounding in general for distribution more is one way to mitigate. Now public safety power shutoffs are just another way to kind of mitigate the risk. One thing I will say is I'm very happy to report that luckily so far this year, we have not had to proactively de-energize any lines. It is only August 20th. So I'm not keeping my fingers crossed. As Andre said, though, putting together a wildfire mitigation program, resiliency program takes time. And so if you want to go to the next slide, Andre, we began our wildfire mitigation journey at BPA in 2019. Our first wildfire mitigation plan was published in 2021. We stood up our public safety power shutoff program wildfire mitigation plan was 2020. The PSPS program was stood up in 2021. Our first static wildfire risk model was delivered by our partners at PNNL in 2022. And since then, we just continue to mature, including coordination with other customer utilities, work prioritization, wildfire safety training for staff. And note that everything that we do is aligned with our current strategic plan, which is the 24 through 28 strategic plan, through maturing asset management, preserving safe, reliable system operations, and also modernizing our systems and processes. So moving forward, we hope to grow our very small team here at BPA that addresses wildfire risk on a full-time basis, implement new technologies. As Larry mentioned, there's tons of new technologies out there, and they are changing every single day. So keeping up on these and trying to figure out the best way to move forward is a big piece of where we're going to be heading. And then we're also looking forward to releasing our 4th edition of our wildfire mitigation plan next year. Couple highlights that we have within our program. Next slide, Andre, thank you. Is first vegetation management. That is at the very core of how we attempt to be as safe as possible. But it's been mentioned a couple of times now, we only have the ability to control what's within our right-of-ways that we have legal rights to. So vegetation outside of the right-of-way is a huge risk to us for falling into the lines, into structures, into assets in general, and could spark a fire. And so we actively work with the Forest Service in multiple regions to determine needs not just next to and adjacent to our right-of-ways, but in the forests surrounding them. So we planned multiple projects together in Oregon, Montana, and Washington and Idaho, actually, and even shared resources for remediation after fires, so cleanup after fires. We've worked closely with them as well. Another successful program highlight of ours is our annual public safety power shutoff tabletop exercise. So essentially, these are realistic scenarios that we put together and run through our processes in April of every year. The first time we did it was in 2021. And we step through the process of what does it take to look at potentially de-energizing, what decisions go into that, what inputs go into that, what are downstream effects. It's not an easy decision, and I'm very glad that that is not on me to make. That is up to our our vice president of transmission operations. But it's a way for us to step through the plan to make sure people understand not only the process, but how quickly we need to make these decisions, because it's not like we're just telling customers like you and I at our homes. We're telling customers like PGE, who then has to communicate to their customers, who are you and I. So it's a little game of telephone. We usually come up with a lengthy amount of lessons learned that we try to correct as quickly as possible before any real events may come up. And then the last big effort we've made recently, along with looking at non-wood pole options, which Larry mentioned from PGE, we have been installing a bunch of fire retardants to our existing wood poles over the past 2 years. So these wraps are activated in high temperatures to build a layer of char, essentially, around the pole to protect the wood from either an impending fire within the landscape or a potential ignition at the base of a pole. We have already had a bunch of success with these wraps, mostly in northern Washington, where we tend to see fires every year. And the cost savings are phenomenal. It's at least a 10 times cost savings of replacing the poles versus just replacing the wrap. And that's at the bottom end. So we're continuing to gather data on that as well. Really, we wouldn't be where we are today without collaboration. You know, we work with utilities and industry partners from the international space to the local space. But one constant that is throughout all of these different venues is working directly with other utilities. So not only are we sharing our practices with others, but we are learning from those that are more advanced. I keep picking on PGE because you're right there, but I talk with partners over at PGE quite often if I have questions and I know that they have gone through experiences. I know who to call, and I'm not afraid to pick up the phone. So we constantly learn from each other, and we're going to need to continue that to be sure that we are as safe as possible moving forward. And I will pass it back to you, Andre.
Perfect, thanks, Kelly. I know our time's quite short, so I'm just going to touch on real brief highlight here. So there are a lot of tools and technologies out there, right? So one of the things that P&L's developed is something called Wildfire. It's a platform. It kind of drives back into that pre-event, peri-event, and post-event kind of consideration. So there's a lot of different things that go into that. I also just want to stress the point in terms of like not, you know, in assessing your risk, you really have to think about all the different temporal horizons in which that risk can manifest. So everything from looking at a year ahead to months ahead to week ahead to current conditions, and then further on out, right, to more the decadal scales. Right. One thing that we know is that the risk is changing. It's changing spatially, temporally. It's changing in its magnitude. Consequence analysis modeling is an important part just in terms of thinking about how to prioritize where should I start with mitigating risk. I also want to just throw some attention to, we've recently released this mitigation plan database. So we've harvested all the publicly available wildfire mitigation plans and put them into an inventory. Within the next week, or the next release of this will also have a LLM, kind of a prompt chat GPT style sort of tool in that, so you can query against all these plans. So kind of some high-level takeaways here. Effective resiliency planning, right? We have to model and plan at different spatial and temporal horizons, right? And that gets back to modeling at these different operational phases. We know that evaluating and determining the reliability and resilience, it's a really complex process, and it's going to look different for every utility. We talked about sort of that wildfire mitigation journey, right? Short-term wins and long-haul actions that are part of that, right? And doing so under changing conditions. And maybe just this last point to make is again on this collaboration coordination piece, right? Wildfire is a landscape scale problem. We really need kind of everybody who has interest or has ownership or has stakeholder interest in these areas in the landscape. We got to get people together at the same table, right? Drive out more common objectives so that we can manage more at that landscape scale. And part of that too is well, it's a benefit to everybody, right? But kind of thinking about the affordability piece, there's a lot that can be done in other parts of the landscape to sort of improve and reduce that risk overall. So the burden doesn't all land on utilities to do it. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea and Kelly. Our next speaker is Brad Hillman from Southwestern Engineering. Brad, you have a lot of experience in industry. So to save some time, I will not read your bio.
It's just nice stuff that my mom said about me, so it's fun. There was something, is this on? Okay, there was something that was just said that I think is super important. I was at a conference on the campus of the other school on the eastern side of the state that shall go unnamed. And, excuse me, the western side of the state. I've got to get my directions right. I think they were just hosting it, but that was the thing. It was a bunch of Northwest utilities collaborating, talking about common issues, sharing solutions. So I appreciated that. I appreciated, I worked at a utility, I said I wasn't going to talk about me, but I worked at a utility for 7 years before I came to work for SEL. I appreciated everything that Larry and Andre were just talking about, and Kelly from BPA. The service that utilities provide is phenomenal. And I just feel like right now, I'm here to help. What are the things that I can do to help you? So one of the things that I've been doing the last several years, we have some technologies. I think it's a lot of education. Who's a student here? Who's going to go to work for a utility? Very good. Please do. We do, all this technology is so new. I don't believe there's a class yet where we say, have you worried about setting a protective element in lumens? Have you worried about setting a protective element based on the speed of light? Things like that. So what I've been doing a lot over the last year or two is just really, I want to say educating. I get a feeling that some of the stuff that we do feels like magic, and it definitely is not magic. It could be magical, but it is not magic. It requires input and action on your part, and I know I personally am, and I hope the company in general, is trying to provide that education for you. So we'll go into this. I felt bad about this last night. I feel like I should have replaced this with some sort of PNNL website, but I go to the WEC website quite a lot. What are the issues that are happening in the western region? And I'm going to predominantly focus in on this one, but we've been hearing a lot about everything else. So we're going to look at wildfire. I chose to sort of break it into two categories of transmission level mitigation methods and distribution mitigation methods. Some bit of definition about when we're talking about things. Broken conductor, down conductor. One of the things that we can do at transmission levels is we can use the fact that there's line charging current to make some detection methods. So we're getting into things that are different. We didn't usually think about stuff like that before. I guess one of the questions I was going to ask earlier, because I remember being in school and doing like fault studies. And, you know, what's your fault current value? Oh, it's 8,000 amps on A phase, right? All ground faults are A phase. So, but you got load on B and C phase. But what did we choose to do? Who's still teaching? We choose to ignore it, right? We generally say, oh, that's so small, we're going to choose to ignore load. Well, when we get into some of the distribution settings examples, my original slide said low energy fault. So for a high impedance fault, we're generally talking about faults that are less than 100 amps. So now we're not doing a fault study to determine what the fault current is for a ground fault. Distribution, I can't generally use sort of a line charging current methodology because the conductors on a pole just aren't high enough. So I have to do other things. Broken conductors, same thing. One of the things I'll mention on the distribution side, I come from South Dakota, so a lot of where I live is very open and rural. I don't want to knock the state or Wyoming or some of our less populated states, but sometimes like the infrastructure where I want communications isn't going to be quite so good. So a lot of these methods will have really hyper powerful effects if I've got good comms from end to end. So one of the things I feel with our distribution mitigation methods, a lot of them can be more urban associated because I would have good communications. I would either have good cell networks, possibly, or the ability to reconductor maybe a distribution line or a lower level sub-transmission line with fiber optics. I've got a lot more choice in an urban environment than I might in a rural or extended urban environment, extended rural environment. Vegetation encroachment, we talked about that already. I was actually sitting over here terrified that I'd have some of the same pictures that you guys did. Birds, chemicals on insulators. So we're seeing a little flash conductor here, attributed to a picture from BPA. And now we're seeing how my mind works. I've got some problems. So now I'm going to go out and what are the things that I can do? So this is going to be my transmission review. Some of the things I could look at would be traveling wave technology, line monitors. I could create no-go zones, broken conductor detection. I'm predominantly going to talk about traveling waves just because we have a little time. I had a dinner the other night where I was talking to Wei, one of the things that we're seeing on inverter-based resources that don't behave like normal high-speed steam generators, traveling waves are caused by the fault. Most protected relaying is relying on the system source to send fault current to the fault. So traveling waves are generated by the fault. So that's one of the things that we feel we're seeing as a good solution for interconnecting inverter-based resources, which don't behave like a 100 megawatt steam turbine that I'm used to working with. Fault current magnitude might only last for several cycles, but I only need a few microseconds to see a traveling wave. Some of the other things I'm trying to do a better job with, helping, I hope, is explaining fully how the technology is going to work really well. Right now I feel there's a bit of urgency. I'm guessing all of my utility friends feel urgency. We've got to come up with answers, we've got to come up with answers, we've got to come up with answers, we've got to do something, we've got to do something. And I want to be there to have a conversation to say, let's just think about it. Because I've seen some folks make some mistakes with some expectations of things, where when you finally sit down and talk about it, you get it. I was going too fast. I wasn't thinking through to the end. One of the things that I've run across, I think for our particular products that support traveling wave technology, it's really higher voltage, it's really transmission level stuff. Line lengths, minimum 10 miles. I did put kilometers in there. I tend to like the speed of light in kilometers. It's a more of a round number than 186,000. Two terminal lines. I think we had a conversation earlier today about getting more people to collaborate. The power system protection people, the system planners that like to put in multi-tap lines. It causes problems. Okay, I thought I saw the slide. Line PTs. Additionally, now I've got a whole bunch of data. I need the ability to, if it's going to be useful to me, I need to be able to retrieve it in a high-speed manner. So now, not only am I talking about high-speed communications between two devices end-to-end to do protection, I've got very, very large magnitude files that if I want to analyze them, I need some way to get that back relatively quickly, unless we're willing to say, okay, drive to the sub, take a sandwich, plan for 4 hours, come back, oops, you got the wrong thing. Okay, let's do it again. So we need really good communications, which also leads me, no pun intended, but we were talking about communications in the presentations, not only between utilities but our groups, but now I'm specifically referring to downloading of data. So some faults are easy to find. Some faults are hard to find. I know I was working, is it safe? Well, there was nothing wrong with it. Idaho Power, anybody here from Idaho Power? A number of years ago, they were using traveling wave technology in another product because they decided to implement it because this line would trip all the time. This line would trip all the time and they'd travel it, couldn't find anything. Line would trip, travel, couldn't find anything. All right, we're going to, SEL said we can get fault locations down to a couple hundred meters. Let's see what we do. So they installed it. And they found it, and they found that where the line was tripping was near sort of a bird. It wasn't like an official bird sanctuary, but there were birds there. What happens when birds take off to fly away?
Make a stream.
Yeah, they make a deposit. They drop a load, yes. Yes, so that was what the term was. I don't know if it's official, but a streamer. Well, that streamer would go across the transmission line and it would cause a fault. We were at least able to figure out what was going on. I honestly don't know what they did for mitigation, but hopefully Thanksgiving had a different feast that day. So this is not an official SEL presentation. This would not pass muster, but I wanted to draw the rough approximation of a transmission line going over a mountain into a wooded area, because my utility life was like that. Very often, we were concerned about burning, well, this was 30 years ago, obviously still concerned about burning things down. Well, now I have the ability to say, what part of this line is the area that I want to avoid. Obviously, it's not good to start a fire on top of a mountain, but maybe this is some form of national forest that I very, very much want to not do any form of reclosing on, or know that that is where the fault is. So now with these traveling waves, I can set up zones. I'm going to get information from both ends of the line. I'm going to divide the line up into quarter-mile segments. Effectively, it's unitless. This kind of goes where we're thinking into a little bit of vegetation management, where I can define some areas where I'm seeing repeated traveling wave generation, though the protection isn't operating. So in this case, we're calling these events. I'm getting these events on the line, but they're not resulting in the line opening or de-energizing. So it could give me an area where I want to go look. Some other things: failing insulators, dirty insulators. This to me is another thing that we release a lot of things with sort of ideas of how we expect them or think they would be useful, and then customers go, what about this? Can I use it this way? I would say this is very much a case like that. We created these what we thought would be really handy non-reclose zones. I can define a couple of areas on a line, particularly where I might have underground that I don't want to do reclosing on. Well, what if I could just, that's my area that's going through the trees. What if I don't want to do reclosing there? Okay, we'll use them that way. It's not underground. This is now an area that I have defined as being a high-risk area. I don't want to do anything there. I'm not going to reclose. Another one for distribution has been high impedance fault detection. This to me, again, it's a very handy technology. What I want to say here is along the lines of, I don't believe there's classes right now in how to set this. So one of the things that we're going to ask you to do is tune this algorithm. It's going to look at the line and it's working on harmonics and interharmonics. We don't expect you to be able to figure that out. We're going to allow the product to do it. But I need a certain amount of load to do that. That's things that we missed when we announced this technology. Not that we were hiding anything, but again, people start hearing things. Oh, this will detect high impedance faults. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Okay, well, let's do a little research first, because I need a certain amount of load for it to be able to arm itself. Do you have, maybe on a recloser on a distribution feeder, do you have 25 amps of primary load? Oh gosh, no, we never have 25 amps of primary load. Okay, for that solution to work on one of our recloser control products, it's not going to work for you. So we need to have a conversation. What is the grounding method of the system as well? The other thing that we have found, you can apply it at the feeder location, but now you're seeing everything on the feeder. We have found that it's better that you can do it there, but also put it out on a recloser that's further down the line and seeing less of the load. You're going to see a better signature of that high impedance fault downstream from a recloser than you will at the distribution feeder. Again, I was just saying, the algorithm tunes itself. It runs over a 24-hour period and kind of learns the characteristic of the line. This is another thing that I've come across with folks. I mean, we kind of generally know that probably, Sunday night is probably not your highest load time. Maybe Monday morning, maybe, we kind of have a feel for that. There are some tools available in these products where you can actually do load trending so that I don't have to, we don't generally guess, and we've got tools elsewhere, but it's something that I've been encouraging people to use in our products is turn on this load profiling feature so I can see where is the peak load. Maybe it's not where you thought it was. I would encourage to do tuning over the peak load time, not over a Sunday night. Things like that. We're learning things that we have never had to learn or know from before. I hope it's at the end there. I tried to sanitize everything. Oops. But again, we're going to see a better signature of the high impedance fault the closer we are to. Another thing that I think is important to note, it's not 100% dependent. We talk about a conductor being on an insulator, right? It's not going to conduct anything because it's on an insulator. An insulator could be the ground. So I have to have some form of conductivity. And I think that's what we're seeing in all of the folks that are doing live power system fault tests as well. So that's another thing, just to, it's a probability. It's highly likely that you have a high impedance fault. It's not 100%. Other things are to use communications-based methods for reclosing to say, this is my fire risk area. Maybe I want to do a different scheme. And a lot of times we have to choose between fuse saving and fuse tripping, fuse blowing schemes. Now I can say I want to do a fuse blowing scheme somewhere and I want to do a fuse saving scheme elsewhere. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have some time for Q&A session. So who have questions? For the panelists. Go ahead, please.
When looking at the insulator flashover line condition monitoring, has SEO considered a practical architecture that combines different sensing streams, like with AI, like for example, using like RGB cameras, thermal cameras, and UV cameras to kind of like tell the difference from like a bird sitting on it and causing like a false positive, or other things like that?
Oh my goodness. Is this good enough? Am I loud enough? I try to keep my personal biases out of things, but where technology like that works really, really well is really on longer transmission lines. I suppose it's possible that you could put cameras in a lot of places. It feels to me like cameras and things that listen and look are more applicable to urban environments because I need to get the data back somehow. And as lines get longer and we're in rural areas, the communications it's evolving as well. But in general, the communications is not as good, so I don't know how I would get the data back anywhere. That's
one other thought is we talked about drones a little bit. So if you've got the cameras run through, they can at least look at it, bring the data back, and then download it. But it's clearly not real time in that sense. But that's probably the closest thing we have to it right now.
I may just add one more thing there, and that's edge computing, right? So you can have these things there, and it's only sending data when it needs to, right? Otherwise, it's just monitoring.
Okay, so I think our time is very limited. So one last question. So Mark, you have a lot of time to talk in the panel session itself.
So regarding grid hardening measures for wildfire mitigation, are there any practical examples of putting some land underground because of the wildfire incident? And if so, is there a potential for DC because when it comes to underground DC might be? Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I thought, okay. So the first part of that was good cases where undergrounding is economic as well as reducing the risk. Yes, absolutely. And so you'll see that in many of the mitigation plans. Can't do it all overnight. So you're taking a piece of it and trying to work your way through your system. So yes, the underground is happening. Your second part of your question, did I hear DC?
Yeah, DC technology for underground is DC lines. I would do DC lines for low voltage DC lines.
I haven't seen any low voltage at this point or medium voltage, only the high, and I haven't seen it as much as underground. We have, again, we have fly low heading down to LA, to Silmar. That's the only DC truly on the West Coast that's large enough. But I haven't seen anybody do a local DC at all.
I might just add one more component to that, and that is just because I've seen it happen in some California utilities where they define high fire threat districts, and anything that's a new build in there, they're automatically going to put that into undergrounding. However, what they're not considering is what is that going to look like in 10 years or 20 years from now, and what is high fire district going to look like then as opposed to now. So, right, the risk is that you may have kind of new builds going in, and they're not undergrounding because it's not going to be a high fire threat district. So those are the things you also got to think about, but again, it kind of ties back to the economics.
One more comment that you could also go the other direction, which is you do underground and now it's no longer a high fire risk district.
Spot on.
All right, let's thank our panelists again.